Good day from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. You are looking live at Launch Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, known as Gagarin's Start, where Yuri Gagarin became the first human to leave the planet on April 12, 1961. Today, a different countdown is underway, this one to send a Russian resupply ship, the ISS Progress 61 cargo craft, to the International Space Station filled with more than 3 tons of food, fuel, and supplies for the Expedition 45 crew. Launch is less than 19 minutes away. The vehicle is fully fueled. The Soyuz booster on the launch pad was moved to its launch pad 2 days ago. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Here at the Johnson Space Center in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers is on console, overseeing the launch phase of today's activities, along with the rest of the crew's activities on board the International Outpost. On console, directing activities today on the right is Flight Director Jeff Radigan, joined on console by spacecraft communicator Rebecca Wingfield, who is talking with the crew on board the International Space Station when required throughout the course of the day. Across the Atlantic Ocean, 8 time zones away on the outskirts of Moscow, is the Russian flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center in the town of Korolyov, ready to monitor all of the systems of the Soyuz booster as it heads uphill, carrying the Progress resupply ship, the unpiloted Progress craft, to its preliminary orbit on the start of a 4-orbit, 6-hour trip to dock to the aft port of the Zvezda service module of the International Space Station. This trek has become affectionately known by flight controllers both here in Houston and in Moscow as the 6-hour schlep of cargo to the International Space Station. In this case, 1,940 pounds of propellant, 110 pounds of oxygen, 926 pounds of water, and 3,397 pounds of spare parts and experiment hardware for the 6 crew members on board the International Space Station. In all, 3.1 tons of cargo about to begin its 6-hour trip to the International Outpost. The launch time is scheduled at 11:49 and 40 seconds a.m. Central Time, 10:49 and 40 seconds p.m. at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, where we have clear skies and temperatures around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The time of the launch is calculated to match the moment when the Earth's rotation carries the Baikonur Cosmodrome into the plane of the space station's orbit. In this case, a narrow corridor of just 30 degrees of phase angle in which the Progress will be inserted basically into a keyhole in the sky to begin its calculated pre-programmed trip to the International Space Station through a series of burns that will, in stair-step fashion, elevate the altitude of the Progress to match that of the International Space Station, and ultimately to fine-tune its path for a docking that is scheduled at 5:54 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. On board the International Space Station, the Expedition 45 crew has been hard at work since awakening some 10.5 hours ago to begin its workday. From left to right is Expedition 45 Commander Scott Kelly of NASA, Russian cosmonaut Sergei Volkov, Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko, who along with Kelly in the second half of their year-long mission on board the International Space Station. Then you have NASA flight engineer Kjell Lindgren, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency flight engineer Kamiya Yui. This half-dozen men on board the International Space Station as they work through a series of experiments, research, and maintenance work on board the International Space Station, and anticipating the arrival of the Progress 61, which will be launched again just 15 minutes from now. At the Baikonur Cosmodrome on Tuesday, the Progress resupply ship, which was encapsulated into the upper stage of the three-stage Soyuz booster rocket in its integration facility, began its trek to the launch pad, a 2-hour trek from the integration building to Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It was mated those 3 stages and then hooked up to the rail car on a horizontal basis that made the 3-mile trek from the integration building to the launch pad at Baikonur, where it was hydraulically lifted into its vertical position, and the clamshell gantry arms swung around the vehicle to permit launch pad workers to begin hooking up power and data connections for the Progress vehicle itself. Again, the Progress carrying more than 3 tons of supplies to the International Space Station. It will take 8 minutes and 46 seconds from launch until the Progress is deposited into its preliminary orbit after it separates from the 3rd stage of the 3-stage Soyuz booster. At that point, the command will be given to deploy its solar arrays and its navigational antennas and to begin the pre-programmed trek to reach the International Space Station. We're just under 13 minutes from launch. The International Space Station at the moment is currently flying 252 miles over Sudan, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. On this orbit of the Earth, the International Space Station will actually travel directly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome just about 2 minutes before liftoff, or at about 11:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. in Baikonur. At the point of 3rd stage shutdown and orbital insertion, the International Space Station will already have passed over southwest China, east of its border with Mongolia, and the Progress itself will be some 1,868 statute miles behind the International Space Station. At the time of launch itself, the ISS will be passing just to the southeast of the Kazakh town of Karaganda, where manned Soyuz landing operations are staged out of, the next of which will be in mid-December, when Kjell Lindgren, Kimia Yui, and Oleg Kononenko return home to complete their 5 months on board the orbital outpost. The launch and anticipated docking of the Progress vehicle to the International Space Station comes just 3 days after the departure of the Japanese H-2 transfer vehicle, the HTV-5, known as the Kanatori vehicle. The HTV-5 was launched back in August to deliver some 5 tons of supplies and experiments to the International Space Station. It was grappled subsequently unberthed and released from the Canadarm2 robotic arm on Monday and drifted a safe distance away from the International Space Station for its deorbit where it burned up harmlessly over the Pacific Ocean on Tuesday afternoon. This Progress 61 cargo craft, the newest in the series of unpiloted Russian supply vehicles, will dock, as we said, to the aft port of the Zvezda service module later today at 5:54 p.m. Central Time, joining the Progress 60 cargo craft, which currently resides on the Earth-facing port of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, attached to the Pirs docking compartment. A good view of the 3rd stage of the Soyuz booster in the white section near the conical top of the three-stage Soyuz vehicle. Inside that launch shroud is the Progress vehicle itself. You see buttressed up against the side of the Soyuz booster is one of the two umbilicals. That one will retract and drop away about 35 seconds before launch. The second of the two umbilicals, which is just behind it, will retract at about the T-minus 12-second mark. That will initiate the launch command sequence that will result in engine ignition, the turbo pumps coming up to flight speed, and ultimately liftoff, which again is scheduled at 11:49 and 40 seconds a.m. Central Time, 12:49 and 40 seconds p.m. Eastern Time, just 8.5 minutes from now. The launch and ascent phase of today's activities for the Progress 61 is controlled by launch engineers in the blockhouse at Baikonur, which is adjacent to and just below the launch pad itself. Once the Progress is delivered to its preliminary orbit following third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, the team of engineers belonging to RSC Energia and Roscosmos at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov will take over control and command of the Progress for the remainder of its 6-hour journey to reach the International Space Station. After docking later today, the crew will head to bed. It will be late in the crew day, in fact, that the Progress is scheduled to arrive for its docking. The hatch to the Progress vehicle scheduled to be opened tomorrow by Sergei Volkov and Oleg Kononenko as they begin to unload the supplies regarding the loading of the Progress vehicle, those 3 tons of supplies that have arrived on board the spacecraft. We're coming up on the 6.5-minute mark to launch. Telemetry is being processed at the blockhouse in Baikonur. A launch key has been inserted into the launch bunker, a real key that transitions the launch sequence into its automatic mode. At the 5.5-minute mark, the launch controllers in Baikonur will take one final look at the range, downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome and report its clearance for the countdown to proceed. The Soyuz booster was fueled over the past 3 hours, no problems reported. The countdown has been smooth as silk. Now inside 6 minutes until launch. The launch controllers in Baikonur report all of the Progress and Soyuz booster systems are in readiness. The Progress is ready for liftoff just over 5 minutes from now. Telemetry systems have now been activated in Baikonur to record all of the telemetry of the final minutes of the countdown, as well as the Soyuz booster's ascent performance. T-minus 4 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. The fuel valves in the propulsion system are now being configured to eliminate the evaporated gaseous oxygen from the fuel tanks back into the atmosphere. The onboard measurement system now has been activated, so strip chart recorders are now running in the Launch Control Center to document all of the telemetry from the Soyuz booster. The replenishment of oxygen into the first stage of the Soyuz booster now has been terminated. Coming up will be the pressurization of the fuel and oxidizer tanks to optimize fuel flow and provide additional structural rigidity to the launch vehicle on the launch pad for the final 2 minutes of the countdown. The booster tanks now being pressurized to flight level. 2 minutes and 22 seconds until launch. T-minus 2 minutes and counting. All systems go at Baikonur. T-minus 1 minute 30 seconds until launch, about 30 seconds away from the Soyuz booster moving to internal power and the initiation of what is called auto sequence start. The International Space Station has passed just beyond the Baikonur Cosmodrome, heading from southwest to northeast. T-minus 45 seconds. The first umbilical will be retracted just a few seconds from now. And there it goes. T-minus 30 seconds and counting. The ground propellant feed has been terminated. Auto sequence has been initiated. Standing by for the start of engine ignition. The engine ignition has started. T-minus 3, 2, 1. Engine start and liftoff. Liftoff of a new Progress resupply ship bound for the International Space Station. 40 seconds into the flight, the reports from the blockhouse at Baikonur are good. Good engine performance so far for the first stage of the Soyuz booster as it heads downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in pursuit of the International Space Station. Nominal engine chamber pressures reported good engine performance. 1 minute 7 seconds into the flight. Good yaw, pitch, and roll. Passing through maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle. All booster control parameters are reported to be normal from the engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. About 30 seconds left in first stage performance. The 4 strap-on liquid fuel boosters will separate, and then the second stage engine will ignite. The liftoff was confirmed at 11:49 and 40 seconds a.m. Central Time, 10:49 and 40 seconds p.m. at Baikonur. Standing by for first stage shutdown and separation. There it is. Good first stage performance. Boosters have been jettisoned. The Soyuz booster and the Progress resupply vehicle, 35 miles in altitude, 78 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, traveling more than 4,000 miles an hour. Second stage engine up and running in good shape. Two minutes 50 seconds into the flight. The shroud covering the Progress vehicle has now been jettisoned. That occurring at an altitude of 52 statute miles. The Soyuz booster now 102 miles downrange, traveling almost 5,000 miles an hour. All structural parameters reported to be normal. Good second stage engine performance. Three and a half minutes into the flight. Not quite 5.5 minutes to go in powered flight. One more minute to go in the second stage performance before that stage shuts down. What occurs for the third stage ignition is what the Russian vehicles are referred to as a hot staging technique. Basically, the third stage engine ignites prior to the separation of the second stage. You can see that, and you're familiar with the stage, the lattice work interstage between the second and third stages to be able to vent the firing of the third stage engine before the second stage separates. All vehicle parameters are reported to be normal 4.5 minutes into the flight. Standing by for second stage separation. We have confirmation of a good second stage separation. The third stage engine is up and running. The lower skirt on the third stage has also been jettisoned. About 3.5 minutes of powered flight remaining. Everything looking good as the Progress heads to its preliminary orbit. The Soyuz booster's third stage and the Progress resupply vehicle now 120 miles in altitude, 212 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, traveling almost 10,000 miles an hour. All vehicle parameters are normal. Roll, yaw, pitch, all the parameters reported to be normal from the launch conductor at the blockhouse in Baikonur. Now 6 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. The third stage engine performing perfectly. A little over 2 minutes to go in powered flight. At the time of third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, putting the Progress into its preliminary orbit, it will be traveling almost 17,000 miles an hour at an altitude of about 125 statute miles to begin the slow and steady engine firing program to increase its altitude and to close in on the International Space Station for docking at 5:54 p.m. Central Time today. 7.5 minutes into the flight, about a minute and a half of powered flight remaining. Vehicle structure parameters are reported to be normal. Good third stage engine performance reported from Baikonur. Again, liftoff occurred on time at 11:49 and 40 seconds a.m. Central Time, 10:49 and 40 seconds p.m. in Baikonur. 8 minutes, 15 seconds into the flight, about 40 seconds of powered flight remaining. All booster parameters are normal. Progress systems in good shape. We're standing by for third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation. We have third stage shutdown. We have vehicle separation. And now we have confirmation that the Progress's solar arrays and navigational antennas have been deployed as planned, completing a perfect ascent from the launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, putting the Progress in its preliminary orbit. The chase is on to reach the International Space Station for a docking later today at 5:54 p.m. Central Time. A flawless climb to orbit for the newest resupply craft en route to the International Space Station. Back here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, smiles on the faces of the flight control team as they monitored the climb to orbit for the Soyuz booster and the Progress 61 cargo craft. Again, a perfect launch, an on-time launch, and a flawless ascent. All of the stages of the Soyuz booster performed as advertised, with the Progress separating from the third stage of the Soyuz booster 8 minutes and 46 seconds after launch, and within seconds deploying its solar arrays and navigational antennas to begin the chase to catch the International Space Station. At the you're looking now at a television test of the external TV camera on the Progress vehicle that will come into play later today as the Progress arrives in the neighborhood of the International Space Station for the terminal phase of its rendezvous. With 3.1 tons of food, fuel, and supplies on board the Progress, it is now safely in its preliminary orbit en route to the International Space Station. At the time of launch, the station and its 6 residents were traveling over south central Kazakhstan, just to the southeast of the town of Karaganda. And at the time of third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, the Progress was some 1,868 statute miles behind the station to begin its 6-hour journey to reach the orbital outpost. So that'll wrap up our launch coverage for today with one programming reminder. We'll be back on the air just over 5 hours from now at 5:15 p.m. Central Time, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, to bring you all of the details of the Progress's journey to the International Space Station and its docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module. In the meantime, have a good afternoon and a good day. We'll see you back here in a few hours. This is Mission Control Houston.